As the rain pounded against the windshield of my car, I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to navigate through the darkness of the night. The desolate stretch of highway seemed endless, with nothing but barren fields stretching out on either side. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the empty road ahead. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of a figure standing on the side of the road, drenched and shivering in the cold rain. Without hesitation, I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I called out, my voice barely audible over the sound of the storm. The hitchhiker nodded gratefully and hurried to the passenger side of the car, sliding into the seat beside me. As they closed the door, I caught a glimpse of their face in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Something about their expression sent a chill down my spine, but I brushed it off as a trick of the light. "Thanks for stopping," the hitchhiker said, their voice soft and melodious. "I've been waiting out here for hours." "No problem," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Where are you headed?" "Just a few towns over," they answered, their eyes never leaving the road ahead. "Anywhere away from here is fine with me." As we drove on in silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about my passenger. Their movements were stiff and unnatural, like they were trying too hard to appear normal. And there was something strange about their eyes, a glint of something dark and unsettling hidden behind them. "So, what's your name?" I asked, trying to make conversation and ease the tension in the car. The hitchhiker hesitated for a moment before answering. "Call me Alex," they finally said, their voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, but something about their response didn't sit right with me. It was as if they were hiding something, some secret that they didn't want me to know. As we drove on, the storm only seemed to intensify, the rain drumming against the car with a relentless fury. Lightning flashed overhead, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. And then, out of nowhere, the hitchhiker spoke again. "Do you believe in fate?" they asked, their voice low and ominous. I frowned, taken aback by the sudden question. "I'm not sure what you mean," I replied cautiously. The hitchhiker turned to face me, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. "I believe that everything happens for a reason," they said cryptically. "That we're all connected by threads of destiny, weaving our lives together in ways we can't even begin to understand." I felt a shiver run down my spine at their words, a sense of unease settling in the pit of my stomach. There was something deeply unsettling about the hitchhiker's demeanor, something that made me want to get as far away from them as possible. But before I could react, the hitchhiker reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder, their touch cold and clammy against my skin. "We're almost there," they said softly, their voice sending a chill down my spine. "Just a little further." And as I stared out into the darkness ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was heading towards something dark and sinister, something that I couldn't escape no matter how hard I tried. But by then, it was already too late. As we continued down the desolate highway, the storm raged on outside, the wind howling like the anguished cries of lost souls. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but my mind was consumed with a growing sense of dread. Suddenly, the hitchhiker spoke again, their voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "Turn here," they said, pointing to a narrow dirt road that seemed to appear out of nowhere. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to keep driving, to get as far away from this stranger as possible. But something compelled me to obey, to follow the hitchhiker's instructions without question. As we turned onto the dirt road, the darkness closed in around us, swallowing us whole. The trees loomed overhead like twisted sentinels, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I glanced over at the hitchhiker, but they sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the road ahead. There was something in their gaze, something dark and otherworldly, that sent a shiver down my spine. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminated the path ahead, revealing a dilapidated cabin nestled among the trees. It looked like something out of a nightmare, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in graffiti. "Stop here," the hitchhiker said, their voice barely above a whisper. I obeyed, bringing the car to a halt outside the cabin. As I turned off the engine, a deafening silence descended, broken only by the sound of the rain drumming against the roof of the car. "What are we doing here?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear. The hitchhiker turned to face me, their eyes burning with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. "We're here to confront your destiny," they said cryptically. Before I could respond, they opened the car door and stepped out into the darkness, disappearing into the night like a wraith. I sat frozen in my seat, my heart pounding in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to drive away, to leave this place behind and never look back. But something held me in place, some unseen force that compelled me to follow the hitchhiker into the darkness. With a trembling hand, I opened the car door and stepped out into the night. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay, and the sound of the storm seemed to echo in the darkness. I took a hesitant step forward, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of the hitchhiker. But they were nowhere to be found, swallowed up by the darkness like a ghost in the night. And then, suddenly, I heard it, a soft whispering in the darkness, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from all around me. They spoke in hushed tones, their words unintelligible but filled with malice. I stumbled backwards, my heart racing with fear. I knew then that I had stumbled into something dark and sinister, something that defied explanation or reason. With a sense of growing dread, I turned and fled into the night, the whispering voices following me like a shadow at my heels. But as I ran, I knew deep down that I could never escape the darkness that lurked in the heart of the storm, that I was forever bound to the hitchhiker and the twisted fate that awaited me in the shadows. And as the storm raged on, I knew that I was not alone, that the darkness was always watching, waiting for its next victim to wander into its grasp. Let's hop onto story number 2, but before I begin reading, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. The engine of my car hummed softly as I cruised down the deserted highway, the only sound piercing the silence of the night. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the desolate landscape. I glanced at the dashboard clock. It read 2:36 a.m. I had been driving for hours, lost in my thoughts as the miles slipped away beneath the wheels. But then, out of the darkness, I saw it, a roadblock looming ahead, stretching across the highway like an impenetrable barrier. I slowed to a stop, my heart pounding in my chest as I surveyed the scene before me. The roadblock appeared to have materialized out of thin air, with no signs of construction or maintenance crews in sight. It was as if it had been conjured up by some unseen force, blocking my path with an air of malevolence. I glanced nervously in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows behind me. But the road stretched out behind me, empty and silent as the grave. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I was alone, trapped on this deserted stretch of highway with no way forward and no way back. I reached for my cell phone, intending to call for help, but to my horror, I found that I had no signal. Panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of my situation. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no way to summon assistance. As I sat in my car, paralyzed with fear, I became aware of a sensation, the feeling of being watched. It was as if unseen eyes were boring into me from the darkness beyond the roadblock, their gaze filled with an unspoken threat. I shivered, my skin prickling with goosebumps as a cold chill swept over me. I knew then that I had to find a way out, to escape this sinister trap before it was too late. With trembling hands, I turned the steering wheel and began to navigate around the roadblock, searching for a hidden path or an alternate route that would lead me to safety. But no matter which direction I turned, the roadblock seemed to stretch on endlessly, blocking my path with an insurmountable wall of asphalt and concrete. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized that I was trapped, ensnared in some twisted game orchestrated by forces beyond my comprehension. And then, just as despair threatened to consume me, I saw it, a faint glimmer of light shining through the darkness, like a beacon of hope in the night. Heart pounding with renewed determination, I followed the light, driving forward with a single-minded purpose as I chased after the promise of salvation. As I drew closer, the light resolved into the glow of a solitary gas station, its neon sign flickering in the darkness like a guiding star. Relief flooded through me as I pulled into the station, the warm glow of the lights washing over me like a comforting embrace. But as I stepped out of my car and made my way towards the entrance, a sudden sense of unease washed over me, prickling at the back of my neck like icy fingers. I glanced around nervously, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce. But the station was deserted, its interior silent and still as the grave. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone, that something sinister was lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting to strike. With a sense of growing dread, I pushed open the door and stepped inside, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty space like a drumbeat of doom. And as I stood there, alone in the darkness, I knew that my ordeal was far from over, that the true horror was yet to come. As I drove along the deserted highway, the monotony of the long journey began to weigh heavily on me. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving the world shrouded in darkness. My eyelids grew heavy, my mind clouded with fatigue. I knew I needed to take a break, to stretch my legs and clear my head before continuing on. Spotting a rest stop up ahead, I signaled and pulled off the road, the crunch of gravel beneath my tires the only sound in the stillness of the night. The rest stop was eerily quiet, the only illumination coming from a single flickering street light. I stepped out of my car, the cool night air sending a shiver down my spine as I surveyed my surroundings. The picnic tables and benches were empty, the garbage cans overflowing with discarded wrappers and bottles. A sense of unease settled over me as I realized that I was completely alone in this desolate place. Shaking off my apprehension, I began to walk around, hoping to find some sign of life, or at least a vending machine where I could grab a snack and a cup of coffee to ward off the drowsiness. But as I explored the area, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I scanned the shadows, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the darkness. My heart hammered in my chest as I quickened my pace, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls of the rest stop. I told myself it was just my imagination, that there was nothing to fear in this lonely stretch of highway. But then, as I rounded a corner, I saw it, a figure standing in the shadows, its features obscured by the darkness. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that it wasn't human, it was something else entirely, something ancient and malevolent. I froze in place, my heart pounding in my chest as the figure stepped forward into the dim light. Its eyes gleamed with a sinister light, fixated on me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. Without thinking, I turned and ran, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls as I fled from the rest stop. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was being pursued, that whatever lurked in the darkness was hot on my heels. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I fumbled with the keys, desperate to escape this nightmare. With trembling hands, I started the engine and peeled out of the rest stop, the figure disappearing into the darkness behind me. But even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped, that whatever had been lurking in the shadows was still out there, waiting for its next victim. As I continued on my journey, the events of that night haunted me, lurking in the back of my mind like a lingering nightmare. I knew then that I would never be able to forget the terror of that rest stop, or the malevolent presence that lurked within its shadows. It was late at night, and I had been driving for hours on the desolate highway, the road stretching out endlessly before me like a ribbon of darkness. My fuel gauge hovered dangerously close to empty, and I knew I needed to find a gas station soon or risk being stranded in the middle of nowhere. Just when I was starting to worry that I might not make it to the next town, I spotted a faint glow up ahead, the telltale sign of a gas station. Relief flooded through me as I signaled and pulled off the road, the gravel crunching beneath my tires as I rolled to a stop in front of the pumps. But as I climbed out of my car and grabbed the nozzle to start filling up my tank, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, and there was no sound except for the low hum of the gas pump. I glanced around nervously, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the darkness. But there was nothing, just the empty expanse of the highway stretching out into the night. Shaking off my unease, I focused on the task at hand, determined to get back on the road as quickly as possible. But as I watched the numbers on the pump tick upwards, I noticed something strange. The glow of the gas station seemed to be fading, as if it were being swallowed up by the darkness. I blinked, thinking it must be a trick of the light, but when I looked again, the gas station was gone, vanished into thin air, leaving me standing alone in the darkness. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was stranded, miles from the nearest town with no way to call for help. I frantically checked my phone, but there was no signal, just an endless expanse of darkness stretching out in every direction. I cursed under my breath, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling with fear as I realized that I was completely alone in the middle of nowhere. The only sound was the distant howl of the wind, carrying with it a sense of foreboding that sent a shiver down my spine. I knew I needed to find help, and fast, before whatever had caused the gas station to disappear came back for me. With trembling hands, I climbed back into my car and turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life as I pulled back onto the highway, the darkness swallowing me up once more. But as I drove, the sense of unease only grew stronger, as if something were watching me from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I glanced nervously in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the gas station, or something worse, looming behind me. But there was nothing, just the empty road stretching out into the darkness. I pushed down on the gas pedal, my heart pounding in my chest as I prayed for the first sign of civilization to appear on the horizon. Hours passed, the darkness never relenting as I drove on, the road stretching out endlessly before me. But just when I was starting to lose hope, I spotted a faint glow up ahead, the telltale sign of another gas station. Relief flooded through me as I pulled off the road and climbed out of my car, the gravel crunching beneath my feet as I approached the pumps. But as I reached out to grab the nozzle, I hesitated, a chill running down my spine as I realized that something was terribly wrong. The gas station was deserted, the pumps covered in a thick layer of dust as if they hadn't been used in years. I glanced around nervously, half expecting to see the same eerie disappearance that had swallowed up the last gas station. But this time, the gas station remained, its glow casting long shadows in the darkness as I filled up my tank, my hands trembling with fear. I knew then that I needed to get out of there, fast, before whatever had caused the other gas station to vanish came back for me. With a sense of urgency, I climbed back into my car and peeled out of the gas station, the darkness swallowing me up once more as I sped down the highway, my heart pounding in my chest as I prayed for the first sign of civilization to appear on the horizon. But as I drove on, the sense of unease only grew stronger, as if something were following me, lurking just out of sight. I glanced nervously in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing there, just the empty expanse of the highway stretching out behind me. I pushed down on the gas pedal, my heart racing as I sped towards the distant glow of city lights on the horizon, desperate to escape the darkness that seemed to be closing in around me. And as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a fate far worse than running out of gas on a deserted highway, a fate that would have swallowed me whole, just like the vanishing gas station in the night. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night that sends shivers down your spine and makes you wish you were anywhere but alone on a deserted highway. I had been driving for hours, the rain pounding against the windshield and the wind howling like a banshee in the darkness. As I rounded a bend in the road, my headlights illuminated something up ahead, an abandoned car, its doors wide open and its engine running. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowed to a stop, my eyes scanning the surrounding darkness for any sign of its occupants. But there was nothing, just the empty expanse of the highway stretching out into the night. With a sense of trepidation, I climbed out of my car and approached the abandoned vehicle, the rain soaking through my clothes as I stepped closer. The interior of the car was eerily quiet, the only sound the steady hum of the engine. I peered inside, half expecting to find someone hiding in the back seat, but the car was empty, completely deserted. My mind raced with questions as I tried to make sense of the situation. Why would someone leave their car running in the middle of nowhere? And where had they gone? With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I needed to investigate further. With trembling hands, I reached out and turned off the engine, the sudden silence echoing in the darkness. As I stepped back from the car, I noticed something glinting in the beam of my flashlight, a set of footprints leading off into the darkness. My heart raced as I followed the tracks, the rain soaking through my clothes as I pushed deeper into the night. The footprints led me to a small clearing in the woods, where I found something that sent a chill down my spine, a makeshift campsite, complete with a tent and a small fire burning in the center. But what caught my attention the most was the sight of a child's doll lying abandoned on the forest floor, its eyes staring blankly up at the sky. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I picked up the doll, a sense of unease settling over me like a heavy blanket. Suddenly, a noise behind me caused me to whirl around, my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned the darkness for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the empty expanse of the forest stretching out into the night. With a sense of mounting dread, I realized that I was not alone out here in the darkness. Someone, or something, was watching me, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I knew then that I needed to get out of there, and fast, before whatever had abandoned the car came back for me. With a sense of urgency, I turned and ran back towards the highway, the rain pounding against my skin as I pushed myself to go faster. As I reached my car and climbed inside, I glanced back one last time at the abandoned vehicle, a sense of unease settling over me like a dark cloud. I knew then that I would never forget the chilling mystery of the abandoned car and the terrifying secrets it held within its silent walls.